Okay, so my name is Lilian Nduati, and sitting here before you today, we have got the future of tech. So yesterday we had a very exciting session where we got to hear from old school tech, and I can see some of the old school tech joining us. But you know, where we are because we have stood on the shoulders of those giants. And you know, yeah, a round of applause for some of them. I can see them here in front of us. And so because of you, we are where we are. So let's dive into it. I'm very incredibly excited to be joined by some of the pioneers in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and data science. And these three are pioneers not just in Kenya, but in Africa. And so I'll just let them introduce themselves and a little bit about what they're working on and how they got into AI. So let's start with you, Chris.
My name is Chris Orwa. Currently, I work for Safaricom, the most hated company. As a data scientist, I'm also a columnist for Daily Nation. Try to write a lot. Also data nerd. How did I join data science? Crazily enough, it was my lecturer who sort of forced me to be, he was doing some nice stuff, and then I went to him like, hey, how do you do that? So that's how I got into data science. Then, wow, it's been a long journey. So 7 years doing several things. Worked at iHub, Brave Venture Labs, a startup. I traded currencies. What else did I do? And wrote so many articles. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I have a mic.
I can see it.
My name is Muthoni, Wanyoike. I work at InstaDeep, which is an AI startup based in a few countries in Africa. How did I get into data science? I studied actuarial science for my undergrad. Most of my friends, some who are here, were taking computer science, and they thought that the future was data and what was happening. So peer pressure is what got me here. What's the other question?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, so aside from InstaDeep, I also co-organize a community of women and men who work in data science in Nairobi. Yeah, that's me.
So, hey guys, my name is Chris Nyaga. Currently working at Andela. So, I got into machine learning or data science mostly just by chance. So, been a developer for a while and kind of stumbled upon descriptions of how data can solve the problems that we face when we are building our applications. So that's how I got into implementing and trying different things. And currently, I'm a technical team lead at Andela. And apart from that, I am also a co-founder in a startup. So it's a stock photography platform, and I try and apply all the different things I'm learning in this data field to influence the business positively, impact the decisions we make, and build sales.
Okay, interesting, thanks. So we have two Chris's, Chris Orwa and Chris Nyaga. So for purposes of today, I'll just say, should I say Chris 1 and Chris 2? Or okay, so let's get a little bit more into, just to set the context for everyone here. How do you define artificial intelligence, machine learning, data science? How do you define that?
For me, data science is anything that has to do with data. There's no concrete definition of what data science is, whether the visualization part, the statistics, the machine learning, all of that. So take everything in data, put it together, that's data science. Machine learning is very specific. It has a very specific definition. It's when you're trying to use machines to learn something that would not be obvious or rule-based. So you're trying to move away from rule-based descriptions of whatever you're doing into more of learning, especially over time from data. And then AI sits on top of machine learning. So AI gives you the overarching principles of how do humans work, how do humans learn, how do we detect different things, changing environment kind of stuff. So it gives you the high level, and then the machine learning does the nitty-gritties of how actually the mechanics of it work.
Okay, that's cool. And Muthoni, how do you define AI, ML, and data science?
I agree with what Chris said. I would only add that my definition of AI is really creating systems and machines that can mimic human intelligence. So all those things, machine learning, data science, reinforcement learning, deep learning, all those things fall under artificial intelligence. Yeah.
And Chris?
There's clearly nothing new I will say they haven't mentioned, but data science is basically playing around with your data. So this is trying around different things, because I feel like even as a data scientist, in the beginning you don't really have a way to structure this data to give you all this information, so you're just trying out different things. Machine learning is using mathematics to create predictive algorithms. So that's like my off-the-bat definition. Artificial intelligence, so I define it as the ability of of any computer system to perform or do tasks that would have previously required quote-unquote human intelligence. So this is perception, image recognition, and verbal stuff. So in the early days, computers were literally rules, black and white, binary. But AI is taking us to a world where, as humans, we grow up learning different things in different ways as different people, and that's what we're creating out of computers.
Okay, and you have something?
Yeah, something which I think is normally very nice, I like saying, is machine learning was invented in 1950. It's not anything new, as people like to believe. Data science was invented, I believe, 5 years ago. As a name, AI has been there maybe from the late 70s, 80s as a concept. So the granddaddy is machine learning.
Oh, whoa, okay. So we're not as new tech as we're thinking right now.
Not at all.
Okay.
The physicists beat us computer scientists to it.
Okay, and so speaking about that, let's delve a little bit more into, we've definitely come a very long way from science fiction movies. A lot of the movies that were made in the 1950s, 1960s used to paint this world of a future of AI. But right now, we're living in that world. We're getting to experience it right now. So could you tell us a little bit about some of the ways in which you are applying a lot of this AI and ML into some of the projects that you're working with, that sort of makes it more real and moves it from science fiction into day-to-day life, affecting either businesses or other areas in humanity?
Maybe to start with a funny example, which is a day sitting at the back of where I used to live, having a cold beer, and then seeing ants going up a wooden post, and then you look at how they're trying to overtake each other, like, this is how Kenyan drivers behave, right? So if you study how these ants try to evade other people, you could actually model traffic. And in that kind of scenario, you're using the natural environment to model how people would be, and you can take some of the lessons that you take there and apply in the real life problems that you have. And other areas, people have studied how ants cooperate to create agents to do certain things. So you learn from nature and you apply them into problems, into the actual problems that currently solving. Safaricom will fire me if I say exactly what they're working on, but most of the things are based around customer behavior, trying to understand more about the customer, and then making propositions based on that. So a data scientist just figures out something about the customer behavior and ties it to products or something else that the business feels that is a priority.
Okay, Muthoni, why don't you tell us a little bit, and if you notice one thing between the three of them, they're also entrepreneurs, so they're not just nerds and geek in the traditional sense, they're also making, what do you call it, they're also making a business out of what they're doing. So just tell us a little bit about InstaDeep and one of the ways or the projects that you're working on around AI.
Thanks. So with InstaDeep, we are quite research heavy, I would say. And one of the interesting projects that we have done is to build, so if you know AlphaZero, and AlphaGo, and that whole story was to train models that can play two-player games like Atari games and all those old games that some people here might relate to. Some of us do not know those games, but training models that can play those games. And with, for example, AlphaZero, then there was a recent competition and stuff with the world champions. So what we've done with InstaDeep, one of our breakthrough research has been to train a model on playing single-player games. So if you can check us on Twitter, InstaDeep AI, you'll see a paper that we've written on ranked reward system, and we're using the learnings from that experiment and from that research to solve bean packing problems, to solve transport and logistics problems. So that's a kind. We learn a lot from gaming. Mm-hmm. And trying to make systems learn how to play some of these games that are quite easy for humans, for example, but a bit complicated for machines to pick on certain things. Yeah, so I don't know if that answers. I hope that answers it. No, Chris.
The paper is amazing. You should read it.
Is it long?
It is long and technical, but we can clarify some things.
Summary.
If it wasn't long, I don't think you would have it. Okay, so the instances I've been working on, more specifically, say, in the business I've been involved in, is it's an e-commerce platform, basically. So I can technically talk about the tech side, since I'm kind of like still in the one-man CTO, one-man engineering, one-man QA team. But so when you have an e-commerce site, you have all these things or people interacting with your site, and you have a specific product you're trying to sell. Our initial market for the platform itself was in Nigeria, because it has a very vibrant ecosystem of photographers and people, and we're currently trying to scale it to other countries in Africa. And one of the things we realized is the behaviors of people vary across locations, across times, and across things that are going on locally. So say, for example, you have your target customers as either businesses or digital agencies or marketers, depending on what your product is. We try and ask for that information when we can, and use a different sets of things to influence what we show you. So let me just give an example. Say there's an event going on in Nairobi. We track these different kinds of things to also influence what we'll show you. So if Christmas is coming along, and we know one of our products is we sell images of Santa and stuff like that, we'll actually give priority depending on where you're coming from, the kind of photos you're looking for, and just even what time it is. So the idea is, when we run these different things, first there's the ethics bit, like we have all this data we're collecting, and what are we really doing to it, and you have to be very careful to not go over without actually clearly stating out the path that you're going along and the implications of the data you're creating. Because I think I've had stories of companies where literally the icons that are on the checkout screen are different for different people, because they realized when they have checkout as check-out, people don't click it, but when they have checkout as check-out, more people actually click the button. I know it's crazy, but this kind of data actually builds the business itself, and when you have the opportunity to do so, you can try and put it on top of your business and just see how it works out. An extra thing I've learned is, don't spend a lot of time, if especially you're trying to apply it in a business context, don't start from the ground up, especially if we have all these different tools around. So for the context of what we were doing is, we needed to have very intelligent image classifiers, but specific to the app itself. So what we ended up doing is having the base of it being handled by sometimes an AI as a service, so something, I don't know if I can call it AI as a service really, or machine learning as a service, but something like GCP and Amazon recognition. There was a session on that yesterday, stuff like that, and then adding your stuff on top of it, because the beauty of companies like Google and Amazon who have these products and they're offering them to customers is, you have the option of putting your stuff on top of it and easily customizing, or I'd say just tweaking the interactions to make it suit your specific case.
Wow, that's interesting. And so just a quick show of hands if we're still together. I told you they were brilliant, right? No. Okay, thanks for going, and we'll come back a little bit to that in a bit. And you've touched on something which is very interesting that since we're at DevCraft, that we also need to cover. Are you all working with local teams from Kenya or across Africa?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
I'm local.
Yes, we are. I'm from Nairobi. I work in Nairobi.
Okay, so one of the things that we've had consistently across the 2 days has also been about the availability of talent, right? Availability of data scientists and people who not only know about this tech, but then also know how to apply them. So what has been your experience, especially as to building teams that understand this intimately? Maybe we can start with you, Muthoni, then come back to Chris.
In terms of teams, I'll say two things. One is unpopular opinion, and then the other is what is politically correct. So my unpopular opinion is that there is a lot of talent. It's just that you need to go a bit deeper to find the people. So for instance, I've met people who say that there are no female developers in Kenya, and there are companies that have hired 10 female developers. What's the difference? It's how far are you willing to go to find the talent? Then the politically correct opinion, or what everyone says, is that there's a shortage of skill in data science. But then that presents a very interesting challenge. And what we do internally is we kind of have an internal curriculum, because we hire people from very diverse backgrounds. One of our very senior AI engineers has a background in nursing. So when we are solving a problem in anything, he brings a very interesting perspective to it. So our internal curriculum really helps people grow their skills, and then use their already existing skills from whatever backgrounds to solve problems. Yeah.
And Chris?
Something to note is that data science is not an entry-level job. There is no entry-level job data scientist. I remember in my previous job, we crawled through thousands of job descriptions, and you realize the minimum years of experience required for a data scientist was 3 years. So you can never come out of university as a data scientist, which that already creates a shortage for that. To add on top, if you look at more mature markets, the entry level for data scientists is a PhD. You don't have a PhD, they don't even look at your application twice. So because we're a bit of a different economy, like, okay, we can do the master's, a good degree, and that kind of stuff. So if we were to go with the strict standards that are being used all over the world, then there's a massive, huge shortage for that skill set. Because you're expected to be able to conceive how to solve a problem, write the code if it doesn't exist, come up with formulas to do that, and it's at the PhD level that people are able to do that. So if you ask how many people have a numerical PhD in the room,
How many people have a numerical PhD in the room?
we only have...
So there's one. Oh, look.
Yeah. So it means like we only have one person here would be considered for an interview. If in that kind of scenario. So there is shortage if you use that definition, but also that depends on the kind of problems that companies are solving.
Yeah.
Not all problems require PhD level people. You're not working for, we don't have high frequency trading hedge funds. We don't have people doing disease simulations and that kind of work, so probably we would go to the degree level. And I think someone was showing me the number of jobs available and the number of people graduate with science-based degrees. So if you use that metric, then you can say, oh, we have oversupply. Mm-hmm. But sitting down, being that I've hired a few people here and there and tell them, like, okay, solve for me this problem, half of the team breaks down. Oh. And then the other half breaks down in problem-solving skills, which is a skill set good for data science, but it cuts across all fields. So if you refine that skill set to the level, like, I need a person with 1, 2, 3 things, I think there's a shortage.
But then just to sort of disagree with what Chris is saying. In the recent past, companies like Google and other companies have been scraping off the requirement to have degrees as a thing. So let's see what the future holds.
This is one thing that I dispute. There's no way you will survive a data science turnaround without a science-based background. Like we're looking at, okay, what's the distribution of this data? Can you compare to distribution? Like, what are we talking about? Oh yeah, I want to know if you can compare this kind of stuff. And
so different countries, different education systems teach things differently. So in Kenya, for example, you need maybe a degree to know the math. Probably there are countries where at high school level you're able to solve some of the problems.
For a developer, I agree 100%. You don't need a degree. But when it comes to data science, you definitely need
So
one.
why don't you, So Nyaga works with a lot of developers and training developers on the continent. Is this something that you've also found to be true based on your experience at Andela, working with?
I'll start with saying, what does the data say, you know? Mic drop. Okay, so Andela's slogan for the longest time has been the talent is evenly distributed, and when it comes to actually applying that, it isn't as easy as it looks. If maybe there's a couple of people in the room who've ever tried applying to, say, the fellowship, or maybe even any job opportunity at Andela or other companies that have very intensive recruitment procedures, you'll realize that there's a lot of things to check at. So if I take Andela, for example, one of the things that goes on to design these experiences is literally the data. So you talk to people who have been through this and iterate and improve. So if we realize that by this time we had this issue with this specific set of people, it meant we needed to actually be looking for it earlier. So the analytics team will be like, okay, so this is what the data shows, this is how people are responding, this is the feedback we're getting. And we talk about it and we say, so how are we gonna improve on this? And coming out with action items, ideally, and actually seeing them through to implementation and making it around. So again, what did we do, what improved, what didn't? And we can and the data itself will show that things look better. So in the conversation of the scientist thing, I'd say one of the things, or the reasons I feel like there are not many, say, entry-level, quote-unquote, data scientist roles is, if you're hiring a data scientist, you'd want someone who's been interacting with data and maybe a lot of data. And for someone who's freshly out of school, the assumption would be from the employers, and this person hasn't really had that experience with the different data, and if I give them my data, it's going to be their first batch. So most likely they'll start playing around. So I don't think it's entirely scientific that you can't actually make it without having that college/PhD/MOOC, because we're in the information age. So the MOOC, the PhD, wherever you get your information from, if you're looking into the data science bit, then make sure you science that data, you know.
Mic drop.
Just one.
To science the data. Yeah,
Okay,
this is in the previous, before university became popular, you had to be an apprentice on someone who has already done it. And then he shows you how it's done, so you learn by doing and learning from them, which is almost similar to university education. It's a better way of learning. But if you say like, hey, I'm gonna go to Coursera, do 5 courses, and then I'm gonna go boom. I was fortunate enough to work with someone who had a PhD, and then I realized I know nothing in this world. I can't even measure anything, because they could measure things in dimension I never knew existed.
Okay, I accept that there's that gap. Let me just.
And then
we have the gap, yes, but the fact that back in the day that would have been the only way to access it. But if I was to look at it in the new school age of the different things.
So as you can see, so one of the things, so we've seen that there's already talent, right? We can agree that there is already the talent, right? So that's one thing we can agree on. And we've also seen that there are massive opportunities where AI and ML can be applied. So let's just dig a little bit into the areas where you all see that AI and ML can have opportunities. So I come from a humanitarian background where, you need to have adoption of technologies that can help you respond to crises faster so that you're able to save lives, for example. And that's one area where AI has a very big opportunity to make impact. But when you look at the landscape, and especially here, not just in Kenya, but in Africa, where would you say 3 main areas, for example, where AI, machine learning, has the biggest opportunity to make impact? And we can start with you, Muthoni.
Please go first.
Okay, Chris.
Okay. So for the company you work for, can you make more money? That's the underlying question. So outside what I do for money, I believe health and education is where people spend a lot of money. If you're able to make people spend less money on that, you can greatly increase the output productivity for society. One thing that I was reading that I still find very fascinating was a company that built content on a tablet, and then as a kid learns, it has built an AI that it asks you a series of questions after you go to certain stages. Then it can know whether you're a slow learner, if you're a fast learner, and then it adjusts the content for that. And the research company that came in and looked at whether that was an efficient way for students to learn, and did an A/B test and said, like, hey, the students who have readjusted content perform better at their final exam than students who never had adjusted content. So probably, instead of having a teacher who sits in front, we can take one of those VR gear, we go into a class, everyone puts on a VR gear, and we all see different teachers. Maybe I like a teacher who has rasters. Better. Maybe I see someone else do kind of thing. So I think education can be a very big place where AI can be applied, especially in Africa where, we're not getting the best of education. So I'll bet on education big.
Yeah, and Nyaga, how about you?
I'll just mention for me the most prevalent thing we can solve, and it's very critical, is in the health sector. So, say for example in the Kenyan context, I've never really been sure if I would dial 999, police would pick up. In all honesty, and I don't know how many people in the room or are confident if an emergency would have come up, and ideally without the different insurance lines and dedicated ones, like the actual government procedures would kick in and come to assistance. And I feel like this is because even the processes themselves internally are not streamlined and clear to the people. At some point, maybe in some areas they might be, but it's not actually being said like that. So how the data bit would come into this is, we know the kind of areas or say neighborhoods that have been having a lot of cases and concerns, and we know the numbers, people know the numbers to dial, but then they're not being picked up, because I think we've ever tried this, just a dummy call, and they're like, yo, guys, I know it's illegal, don't quote me, but we just tried the number and nothing happened. And if I think of even just applying technology to this kind of scenario, sometimes I don't really need to talk to someone to tell them there's a fire coming up. If I can communicate to someone else on the other end of the line, whether verbally or by message, whether in Swahili or in the language I know, and I'm so sure that the fire brigade will be informed that there's a fire here, then that is an area to be innovated in. There's companies in Kenya that have been working on Swahili NLPs, which is a very interesting area. And I think the more progress we make, and not just limiting it to Swahili, but other languages or even dialects that have come up of the languages we use, so Sheng and the likes, and then bringing all this technology together. And I think we need, and it would require the government at the center of this to facilitate all these things working together, and we would actually see the difference in society.
Okay, thanks. And Muthoni?
Yeah, for me, it would be planning, the question of planning and congestion. I believe we are at a point where we are collecting so much data in different ways. So I do not understand how we put money aside to do a new road and know that the road is going to take 10 years, but kind of do not consider how many cars will be on that road by the time we are completing it. So we start solving a problem without looking at the data that is there, and then end up creating a solution that caters for a problem that existed 10 years ago. So just planning, solving congestion, and solving day-to-day challenges. I read an interesting tweet that I'll paraphrase, maybe wrongly, and it was something like your company or your startup doesn't need AI or ML or data science. Probably what you need is an analysis of your internal processes, your customer service, and all those things. And once you streamline those processes, just using the data that you have, then you can go to the next step. But you can't skip this basic step of solving the immediate problems and then try to build self-driving cars or
Right, because technology is an enabler, right?
Yeah.
So if your processes are broken, then you're just accelerating a broken process.
Yeah.
And just to get into that, just before we open it up for questions, what are some of the obstacles or challenges that would need to be overcome so that we can move forward to a society that is, powered by AI, ML, on a different level?
I would say for me, representation is important as we look towards the future. Right now, if I Google beautiful woman, it is people I do not relate to. And if I just go to Airbnb, for example, I get recommendations for things in Nairobi, which means for Google search, it would be, it's something they can do. If I Googled beautiful woman in Nairobi, I should see things I can relate to. You get my point? So the data that we are collecting also has to factor in people who are not in those data sets, situations that are not currently represented in some of the scenarios. So for me, representation will be very, very important. Yeah.
And Chris?
My input would be, like Kiri like to say, the problem is between the computer and the chair. The problem is the people accepting data decisions. And I think I'd mentioned this as someone looked at, for example, government, how many decisions do they make using data? And it's only 4%. So if you're going to counteract a decision made by data, then there's even no point of even starting out with the data process. It's a very labor-intensive process, takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. So whatever outcome comes out of it has to be useful. Otherwise, the whole problem is not insurmountable. So we have to first of all figure out: do we want to be more data-driven? Do we want to accept more data decision, even if they go against what we initially believed to? So the more we accept data-driven decisions, the more money gets pumped into the data world, the more people do more cool stuff, and etc.
Yeah.
So when we started, you mentioned movies imagining the future with flying cars and all these automated things, and we're in 2018 in Uber Chap Chap, So it's pretty cool. It's amazing. We've done a lot, and yeah. So one thing that I think as techies, we also need to make clear to the same people who are watching the movies together and also the people who are making decisions, say in corporates at the top, in the government, is what can we really do at this point? Because I don't know how many of you have been in situations heard of scenarios where companies want to get into this kind of scenario, but they come with moonshot ideas without starting with the basic stuff and starting small and trying to solve the simpler problems. I feel if we put that kind of focus, and I was actually very happy when I heard Bitangen Demo is going to be heading the task force, the government task force, because that's at least that's someone who is very experienced in current, understands the technology that we have at this moment and what it can do, and we're going to use that specific technology to enable what we want to do and the problems that we want to solve. Another big challenge that I see, again, it's a very controversial topic, because in the area of regulation, there's a very big gray area onto what's right, what's data analysis, what's privacy breach, and stuff like that. If we are able to streamline that process, per se, for some reason wake up one morning and everyone in the community agrees that we're going to have this organization that says you're not going to be deploying your AI or something system without these specific procedures in place and stuff like that. That's a very long procedure, and again, it requires a lot of work. But my idea is if we're able to just have those things or those specific bits and working, then it would actually be easier to see, or at least it would be more common to see practical applications of these solutions in different countries.
Right. Because with every great power, there comes great responsibility, right? So I'd want to open it up to questions at this point, and we can start with, where's the mic? Okay. And then we'll go to end there.
Hello, my question is targeted at Chris Orwa, but anyone can answer. I think based on what I've heard you say, you've made it sound like we're very small in terms of where we are in with this technology compared to the rest of the world. And my question is, what will it take for us to become not only consumers of the technology, but also contributors in the sense that we don't have to wait for Google research or for IBM or for other countries to produce this, but we can also have something that we give to the world from this technology so that you can say this is Kenya's contribution maybe to AI, and even other countries can use it and it originates from here. And also, how can we advance like research, not just using this in the business sense, but also advancing the research in AI and this technology?
Okay, just before we can maybe take 2 more questions and then we can answer. Kagonia, just at the back.
Hi guys, my name is Loki. So my question is around one of the buzzwords in the field of data science, so data-driven decisions. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on what data-driven decisions are and how they play out, like in your day-to-day. How exactly does that play out in what you do? All right, thanks.
Okay, and yes, Kagonia, then.
Okay, thank you. I'm Oscar. Well, I'm so grateful you brought up the thing about humanitarian, and my question will drive toward that aspect. So, all of us, most of us here are developers, data scientists who are on the panel. My question is, we tend to forget that with our society today, we are a third world country. And our major focus, we're sort of like competing with the first world countries. With the technology that we're using, I consider like we are more consuming than contributing. So I'll drive straight to the point. Let's look at the society back, like on Uko Ocha, Rudy Uko Ocha. There are people who need to benefit with this technology that we are using. How can we use, as data scientists and AIs out there, how can we use the technology to help that kid who cannot even afford primary education or insurance? How can we help using the data that we collect or you use?
Okay, thanks. So let's start, Chris.
Quickly taking the first question about what can we do as a country. Put money. In Canada, the government put in Montreal, they invested $100 million into companies that are doing some form of AI for public good. That will trickle down into other areas to attract talent and etc. So as long as we're not overtaxing ourselves to build roads, we could take some of that money, put it into AI, and it would grow. It's more of policy and money. If you have good policies and you back it up with funds, assuming they don't get stolen, then that's the way to go. About data-driven decision, this is a very interesting thing that previous boss used to say. If you're arguing about something, test it, right? So we are arguing about degrees and no degrees, then you test it. That's how you do data-driven decision. I can put my point of view, she can put a point of view. Our point of view doesn't matter. Like, let's look at the data. What does it say? So as a policy, every time you have an argument, you test it. That's how you encourage data-driven decisions. About rural areas and AI, I don't know. Maybe we can set up some solar power so that they can provide cheap energy for people in the city, and then you give them money, because there's need for like a basic infrastructure, right? Even if that basic infrastructure, electricity, food, healthcare is not existing, there's very little that could be done. There's a project reminds me that, think about in Nairobi, you want to collect, there's a research about different types of energy that people use, are using GECO, are using a gas, and looking at how people utilize energy. So it could be simple in Nairobi. Then you go do that in Turkana. First of all, the family migrates. Second of all, there's insecurity. That day, rain has swept off a bridge. So just collecting a very simple data as what's the energy used for people in northern Kenya, it's something that takes 6 months and a huge amount of money, and you have to hire guards and kind of stuff. So there's just a very big barrier to getting AI to that level.
In terms of research, I would say what we need to do is to publish and to keep publishing. So the 32nd, I think, NIPS will be happening this year.
What is NIPS?
NIPS is you can just Google, it's a conference for people in AI that has been happening for the longest time. So 32nd probably means 32 years. So till this year, this is the first year where a paper was accepted from Africa. I don't know about last year, but I know from 2016 going back, no paper has been accepted into NIPS that has any connection with Africa whatsoever. So there are initiatives to push people to publish, to learn how to do good. People do good research, but they're just not maybe confident enough to share their work or to submit their work to some of these places. NIPS sold out in 11 minutes this year, which means that if we aren't pushing ourselves to that level, then we are really playing at such a low league. So we need to build the muscle to compete at a global level in terms of research here.
Sure.
I'll start with data-driven decisions. So I think, especially when you're trying to apply to processes and in a business, plan, pilot, analyze what's the difference after you've done that. And I think that's basically it. That's like a short summary, because if you have this form of data that ideally has come from your pipeline, like you've collected it throughout and at the end, and you want to change some things in between and at the start, then that's what you do. And that's sort of also how we apply it even at Andela. So if you're making a decision or we want to try out a new procedure, plan for it, inform, get comments and suggestions from different people, be open. And again, when you're arguing about something, test it. So if someone says, what if we tweaked this and put this at this point, you can do different pilots for the different ones and see what's the difference and use that data to make your decision. The last question was very interesting because, I understand. So an example I would say is, say, Safaricom, one of the bigwigs in the country. We have 4G in, say, many cities. I don't know how many cities in Kenya, but I do not know if the whole country, if there's a place I would go and not get 2G network. Like if I went to the outskirts of home, do I have to go on top of a tree to call my friend in Nairobi? I don't know about you, but sometimes this kind of things happen. So I'm trying to get to what you've said. It looks like we're chasing fast world, and then people at the forefront, we're moving so fast, and we can easily forget coming as a group together. And I think this is where there is space for us to innovate, because ideally, even as we create solutions, there's this thing where, especially when you're a developer and you're designing a product, if you design it for you as a user, even though you'll be one of the users, most of the time you might get it wrong. because we tend to look at things from a very technical and structured order, where you might build an app with hundreds of options and configurations when only 2 are needed, and those 2 were basic enough to just get someone started on your product. I think companies, I've seen like companies like, say, Twiga. The Twiga CTO yesterday mentioned that they had a home screen on their mobile app, and some of the people thought that they click that when going home. So see, that's very interesting, and that's what the data shows. So if that's what the data shows, and we're trying to educate people in these other different backgrounds, then how do we use this technology? We make it as simple as possible. We lower the barriers. Are we transmitting data? Are we building an app and testing it over 4G, and you're deploying an app in Laikipia where you might force someone to go on a tree?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Let's take a couple more questions. Kagonya.
Yeah, so I have a comment that will end in a question. First of all, I think a perception on, sort of debunk this perception that the progress of a third world country has to go on, on a particular trajectory. In other words, we're not behind. Like, can we stop thinking that we're behind? There's something known as leapfrogging. So we all have mobile phones over here. The first world, what happened, they had landlines, and then everyone had a landline, and then now we started with mobile telephony, but Africa leapfrogged that. So we moved from no phone to mobile phone. And this has gotten rid of some professions. We don't have telemarketers. Okay, we have some companies who try to do telemarketing, but it's really atrocious, like SPT Japan. Anyway, but so what I'm trying to say is AI can actually allow us to leapfrog some things. So we're talking about the rural user. That means you need to understand the context of that rural user. If we're going to have a rural smart home, it can work. We can understand how the person relates, etc., and build those. We're thinking about connectivity. Google has thought about this. We don't have to go the fiber way. We can do Project Loon, which means that you have balloons in the air. So that takes care of infrastructural issues. We're thinking about roads. We can leapfrog roads by having flying drones. It sounds crazy. But the other crazy thing is that Kenya is the country with the most natural resources of energy. So when you combine water, sunlight, hydrothermal, geothermal, we have the most. So I think what I'm trying to say is we need to break out of this trajectory thinking that first we'll do A, then do B. We need to be creative and stop thinking within limitations. And for me, the next flattening platform is AI. So first it was the computer. It made us flat. Next was the internet, makes us flat. The third one is AI. And if we're all in this room discussing AI, it means that we can actually be the next developers of AI without thinking of limitations. And there are those limitations that exist, but I believe our creative minds can come together. So my question is, after my speech,
Okay. All right.
I know, kwa hayo machache, ningependa kusema, how can, because I'm grappling with this, how can AI make us leapfrog? So, like the idea of roads was one. We had a design thinking session this morning, and it was interesting for us to think, if we're designing for someone in South Sudan, we can just do away with roads and have drones. And it's a crazy idea. But is there any other way, with your experiences, you can think of how AI can help us leapfrog some technologies without having us think of it as a trajectory?
Yeah, okay. A couple other questions before we get into that. So there's one here.
Actually, my name is Wilfred. Mine is just a short comment. I'll try and make it much shorter than that. So I have a colleague of mine, I work in the humanitarian sector, and I have a colleague of mine who's a PhD in statistics. So he would have raised his hand up when Orwa was asking. And he also teaches at JKUAT. One of the things he's told me so many times is, because we work together and I write code and he does the statistics, I usually just tell him, just give me the formula. Because then he can do those nice regressions and all of that. He also does some code. But neither of us can do the whole thing by ourselves. So it's really the combination of somebody with both those skills. And one of the things he has been saying is, and he's actually working on it, is we need curriculum in the universities that can then be used to churn out an army of, people who are good in all these things we're talking about. So this is actually a comment to Chris specifically, that maybe corporates like yourself can invest in that area, so that you have an army of people coming out that have got those skill sets. He teaches a class with 100 statistics students at master's or PhD level, and they're not covering any of these things. The question is why, if we want to have this thing solved. Thank you.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that you brought up. And one last question, then, yeah.
Hi, my name is Victor. I just wanted to ask, get your thoughts in regards to AI and when you think we'll be able to solve general intelligence. And number two, which is the main question, is what are your thoughts on the effects of artificial intelligence to society, mainly Africa? Because if we look at the Industrial Revolution, we saw things like people who had blue-collar jobs weren't making as much money, so crime increased, and there's so many different effects. So in your opinion, what do you think is going to change in society once AI is fully implemented, so like 40 years from now?
So let me start with the last question or comment that was mentioned. Is I recently read a paper that was called, it was titled Progressive Deindustrialization, and the bluff was we're creating a lot of technologies, and a ripple effect that's coming to hit us is we are losing, say, some of the jobs. As was mentioned, we do not have a lot of telemarketers, but then think about just even the solutions we're making for communication, say, customer service. There's a lot of customer service bots nowadays, Facebook bots, since they introduced, since Messenger introduced Facebook bots, then a lot of companies and businesses are using them, and we're losing that drift. And I think this, again, goes down to what he mentioned in curriculum and education. So as these things are being drafted, we need to, ideally, even not as they're being drafted, but even us as guys who are out here, one of the things we can do is just contribute, because contribution can come in the papers, as she mentioned, publishing different papers, and also just playing a role. If you find yourself in a position, say, in a big company or a corporate that has the funds, connections, and the name to push for something, then you can push for it, because if we do not start at this point, we'll get to a place where it's now become a need. And at this point, a very critical need. It's not that it isn't right now, but we're not feeling the pinch as such. That's why it's taking very slowly. The progress is very slow in that area, especially education.
And to the question of how can AI how can AI help Africa to leapfrog? Muthoni, do you want to tackle that?
I would say that AI is an enabler. It provides us an opportunity to rethink the old ways of solving problems, or to use to improve our ways of solving problems. It gives us an opportunity to think things in a different perspective and to experiment with the data that we already have. So I think there's that opportunity of it being an enabling tool or process, yeah.
Chris?
AI and leapfrogging. So the reasons why some people leapfrog or societies, for mobile phones it was price. That's what made the leapfrog, right? So you have to be able to identify what made the leapfrog. So looking at the same thing, is there any other thing we can identify using AI? So hey, the problem we have with poor decision making is having structured decision follow to the end. Can AI help in that? So being just a new thing does not necessarily mean that it can help us do the leapfrog. It can either do it or not. But we have to identify what does a leapfrog look like, and can AI play a role in that? If you ask me about drones, I'm like, no way. People will shoot down those drones and sell them for spare parts. If you ask about hey, can we look at behavior and recommend certain things, they're okay, people just don't accept data-driven decisions, so we can do that. I'm not being the devil's advocate. I just it hasn't been clear yet that this is how AI can be used to help us leapfrog in certain areas that we have. Even if we build things to predict our budget, predict crime, predict, people who will die for certain diseases. Decision will end there if no one picks that decision and takes a third like an action from that. So from my perspective at this time, it's not yet clear how it is. And I think Linus Torvalds had a very good idea that he's not a thinker, he's an engineer. He wakes up in the morning, he sees a pothole, he wants to fix it. He doesn't gaze at the stars and imagine about what's happening in the galaxies. So I think you should be Linus. You just wake up in the morning and fix the pothole that you have at the door. And some things become clear after we do more things and start understanding that. So maybe at this time it hasn't crystallized yet that this is it. And there's if you like reading about stats and kind of things, what Nassim Taleb called black swans, it's like you can never predict a black swan. A leapfrog is a black swan. It's an event that cannot be predicted by any mathematics. So if you think you predict World War II, if you can predict crashes in market, leapfrogs fit into black swans. You cannot predict them. You can prepare yourself for them, but you cannot really predict them. So I'd be skeptical to put my skills in predicting stuff, a leapfrog with the AI. Teaching in universities. The very first time I thought I was worth a data scientist, I went to kaggle.com. I was like, I'm going to hammer some of these things and win $100,000 US. Until I saw someone with a PhD in quantum mathematics, oceanography,
astrology,
astrophysics.
And they were writing code as hell. I was like, I better just go do sentiment analysis on Twitter and write a blog about it. But the thing I got off of that, like, people had very diverse backgrounds, and they were refitting themselves into data science. They already had the very good basic understanding. And I think I was conversing with someone, I believe it was Loki, was telling me, like, the reason why Ivy League graduates are highly sought after, it's not because they come from a prestigious university, it's because the course is so thorough that they know your minimum is best than the average in the market. So think, instead of looking at how much changing the curriculum, we can look at how can we do the basics very good. If you ask someone to come out of a university, what's a linear regression? Like, okay. So you're even going like neural networks and all that kind of messed up thing. Like, just I want you to be the best at linear regression, right? And to me, what I did was, like, I learned one thing, and then I want to know it very well, apply it in 1,000 things to know where it works, where it doesn't work, until I become very good. Then it's like, okay, now I want to go learn Bayesian statistics. Now I want to go and learn, something more to do with prediction and etc. So I think it's more of reinforcing the basics, other than figuring out, like, okay, corporates can come in, put in some money, put in some fancy curriculum that we got. So I think maybe looking back and covering our basics for that. Effects of AI. Maybe Tina would be more interesting.
Are we looking at a future where, it's being run by robots and every movement that we make is being monitored? Like, what are some of the effects of AI that...
Kagonya thinks is that I think we're still far, to be honest. The problem with AI, it requires a highly structured environment. If you take a Tesla self-driving car and put it on Gong Road, it'll end up in a ditch. Yeah? Because it has to read the signs, it has to read the markings on the road, it has to know how wide the road is. And there's a sign that stop, then someone wrote, can't stop me. I was like, Tesla will read that, the Tesla AI will read that kind of stuff. So there's I think I like going back to basics. Mm-hmm. Before you have very good basic infrastructure, AI can't do very much. People underestimate how much goes into predict. I was arguing, like, let's say I want to predict your credit worthiness. I would have where you live, how much you earn, which school you went to, and I have like maybe 10 variables to predict a credit score. So every time something changes about you, I have to add variables to do that. So if you have too many variations in whatever you're doing, you're lacking enough data to predict what you want. And the problem with unstructured environment, it means there are too many unknowns, which means, first of all, Tesla has to know, is it a pothole or not? Before knowing how fast it should drive, then am I likely to land a ditch or not? Am I likely to? But in America, where the roads are good, it's like, okay, just figure out which speed you need to go and not hit a kid. So we still have some things to take care of. So the effects, we will import a lot of AI from the West, especially in education. We will buy cars that are AI-enabled. We take them to River Road and figure out how to re-engineer. You'll have your mechanic writing code, which I think still happens.
Which is an interesting future to think about, that your mechanic will now be required to write some code.
Yeah. It will be interesting because there's no engine part. It's like, let me write a for loop to test how this tire goes in like. So that would be good. We could offer something that's unique to the continent, but like all things that are hyped up, I'm like, okay, let's look at what's concrete thing that's come out of the market. I think the only thing that came to mind was I don't know if the company is still available, it's still in market. It's called Wayo. They're trying to create suggestion boxes so that when you walk into a supermarket or a hospital or a bank, it detects whether you are there. And when you get pissed off, it somehow detects and sends you a message, hey, are you feeling good? Are you being served well? And I think they deployed it in a bank, in Mater Hospital, and I think KCB. I can't remember which bank it was. And to me, this was like the AI of Africa. You know, where you get in the line for 7 hours, and like, oh my goodness, and then it's like, ding, oh, we realize you're feeling not bad. Can we give you a glass of water, please? Yes, give you a glass of water. So, and then you're like, okay, we know your doctor is not here today, blah, blah, blah. So because it is built and it's there, I think AI in service delivery, we could offer that to the world.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So just to wrap it up a little bit, and that's a great segue into the next conversation. What is your dream space? Like 5 years out, 10 years out, even 20 years out, what's your dream space? Is it robots overtaking? Is it, waking up in the morning and having your news delivered to you? Like, what does that AI-powered future look like? What's your dream space? And I'll start with Nyaga, and then come to the mechanic code. You wanna? Okay, fine.
I only think about tomorrow.
Okay.
And I'll have a very nice country house in Tigori that does not have technology.
Okay, that's interesting because, every side of something has the good side and the bad side. And there's something called, the monster side of tech, which, people are always a little bit fearful of, and that also inhibits or impacts how people adopt it. But that said, what is your dream space?
I think with the drive that we're pushing right now from companies, from governments, it was pretty cool to hear that Google set up an office in Ghana last year, an AI research center, which is a very interesting location because why didn't they come to Kenya? It's okay, but
my feelings.
I had to just get it back. Okay, I think if I look at the Kenyan context, I want to see a future where data is actually being collected and used to make decisions on in a large scale. Ideally, not just it's gonna eventually. I feel like we're still in a fad phase where there are buzzwords and even businesses are getting into it because it's more of a fad. And when we actually are able to cross that and look at them from a need case point of view, so we start with the most critical problems we're facing. Find out how we can reduce the prices of fuel by analyzing all the different costs and data that we're driving into the government. And if the government is actually using that, and an interesting thing is, I think that's actually possible at this time. It's just that a problem can be between the chair and the laptop. But when we're able to fix that bit, then we should see a lot more innovations. And when we get these early ones, then there's better set for more. So when we have the simple, like, as I said, this is something I think we're able to do at this moment with the right organization and structure. And when we're able to solve the problem that is us, and now focus on using this technology to improve everyone else's lives and environments, again, with the same tech, then we'll see maybe, I don't think in the next 5 or 10, because I don't see why we would need flying cars. Say, like at this moment in Kenya, we wouldn't really innovate flying cars. We would find a way to create roads that can be carried and placed in another place. And actually, data can be used to do this because we can just try and iterate on the different things. So I'm saying this.
or maybe we most need the flying cars because of our roads.
Okay. Yeah, well, because I'm thinking of a future where we're not leaving half of the country behind, you know. If we get to a place where we have enough money and Musk says, I'm taking top 100 people from every country, and Earth, we develop Earth to the point where we mess it up, because we don't want to mess it up. We want to create a good environment that we are going to be building upon. So in the next few years, we're headed there. But yes, as Chris said, let's think about tomorrow first and fix the pothole.
And what about you, Muthoni? What is your dream space?
10 years ago, my folks would say, do not talk to strangers, do not get in a stranger's car, do not get into a stranger's house. Today, I got an Uber to come here. If I'm going to a different place, I'll be in an Airbnb and all that. So honestly, I cannot predict the future. There is immense possibilities and things that we wouldn't have thought about 10 years ago happening now. So the future is, I agree with him for the first time. Let's just deal with today.
With tomorrow.
Let's deal with today and leave the future for,
Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts around artificial intelligence, machine learning, and data science. And we've definitely learned a lot about what's happening, not just in Kenya, but also in Africa. And also, I hope that the takeaway from this is that we do have the talent, we do have, they say that where there's a lot of challenge, that's also where there's a lot of opportunity. So any quick 1 second parting shots before we leave?
1 second.
1 second parting shots. One epic quote.
Drive. It's a Friday.
Trust the data.
Trust the data. And Chris, or Chris too.
I'm trying to think of an awesome one, but
if you think you'll mess it up, so just if you don't think too much.
if you can't explain it well, you don't understand it well.
Okay, well, thank you so much. A round of applause for this take, please.
Let's have a round of applause for these guys as they leave the stage.